Witam Państwa serdecznie. Hello everyone. Quick correction, I won't be talking about soundtrack. I'll be talking about sound design. I put in music just as a, sort of something we can just get into the mood. Anyhow, I'm very happy to be here. This is my first time at the Digital Dragons, and I'm really enjoying it so far. So let's just get started. So, what you can expect today, just very briefly, there are going to be some spoilers. I was trying to pick examples and just kind of wanted to share a lot with you and try to pick something that is not really a big spoiler, but I have to put it out there. So anyway, we'll very quickly go through the introduction. I'll talk a little bit about myself and talk about the production, where I come from, where I work. We'll go over some tools and tech, probably very briefly, and then I really want to focus on the sound design elements, on things that we did, how we did things, how certain things worked, how some things didn't work as expected, and just kind of what kind of lessons we've learned through the process. And we'll do a Q&A at the end. So about myself, so I'm actually from here. This is my hometown. Seriously, this is me in front of the dragon, how appropriate. So I grew up here, I went to school here, Academy of Music, I was a musician, and I left when I was 27. And I went, so this is me, I was playing drums and percussion. Then I went to Boston to study at Berklee College of Music, and I moved to LA. After that, worked in the film industry for about 2.5 years, more on the music side, but sort of decided that sound design is really what I wanted to do. And the opportunity came up to work for this company that was later acquired by Activision, and so I worked with Activision a little bit, and then I ended up at Sony PlayStations in Santa Monica. And now I'm back. So this is so very quickly, just to understand what the group I'm a part of, at PlayStation there's Worldwide Studios, which is a number of studios, and we're part of the product development group, which is something like internal resource that the developers can use if they choose to. They don't have to work with us. But we're part of that, so and there's sound, there's music, there's visual arts, there are different departments that can help out the developers. So I go from project to project on different Sony projects. Like right before God of War, I did Bound with Plastic, which was awesome. And so that's our facilities, and you can see. And we're in Santa Monica. Well, technically not in Santa Monica, but we're still called Sony Santa Monica. So, before we get started and talk about production and everything, I just put together a very quick video of sort of behind the scenes of how we did things. It's just like a minute clip, so I hope you will enjoy that. so that was it. So you were able to see a few things that we did and sort of creatively how we use different, very different things just to make it the way it sounds. So about the production, I really have to mention this, that this is by far the biggest project I've ever worked on. It's just, the scope, it was enormous. It's like 40 hours of gameplay. So this is just a part of the internal team. I don't think it's actually all of them. So that doesn't include even people outside of the, all the vendors that were helping out with different things. Doesn't include any actors and mock-up people. And so there was a huge team, and there was about, at some point, about 8 sound designers working on it pretty much full-time. And we kind of split work, obviously. The way we try to do it is to kind of have everyone own a part of the game, and that person is responsible, so either for levels, or characters, or cinematics, or UI, or those kind of elements. I was working on a few levels and on a few bosses, which I will show you in a second. And we also had help of implementers that were implementing the game. Just to give you an idea of the scope of the project, I actually asked my boss to compile some numbers of kind of how much time and how much resources we've used for the project. So very quickly, so there's 100 cinematics, 16,500 lines of dialogue. There was 3 hours of original music recorded and 14 hours of music edits. There was 8 core dialogue coordinators and 8 additional dialogue coordinators working those numbers are not for the entire project, because the project was pretty much 4 years, so that's just more towards the end of the project. There was 8 core sound designers, and including me, and 12 additional sound designers. So we spent 2,600 man-hours for casting. We spent around 2,500 man-hours for cinematics. We spent 28,000 man-hours for sound design, and about 13.5 thousand man-hours for dialogue. So that adds up to almost 49,000 total man-hours, which blows my mind when you convert it to years. So it's basically 23.3 work years. So if one person worked on the audio, it would take 23 years. So that's how we felt. There you go. You have to have a cat in a presentation. You can't do it without it. Anyhow, so let's move on to tech and tools very briefly. Sony Santa Monica, they have their own proprietary engine that's been built over the years, so it's not the newest engine. They use Maya for level editor, and we've been using WWise for sound implementation. It's pretty much our favorite right now. There was, like I mentioned, there were sound implementers that we would basically deliver stuff to WWise and Arthur and prepare everything there, and then just hand it off to implementers. As far as the project setup, it was pretty straightforward. One thing that we did do maybe a little bit differently is we intentionally didn't set up a lot of buses for mixing. I mean, some projects have, I've seen projects that have 100, or 200 buses for mixing, and makes it really difficult to manage. So we had pretty small amount of those the buses. So, but other than that, it was kind of a straight up, implementation in WWise. So in terms of high concept of the game, it was it's a very different game from previous God of Wars. I worked on God of War Ascension and remastering, and the goal was that it's supposed to be sort of like a reboot or reimagining of the series with Kratos. And I think what happened, and what our director Corey Balog talks about a lot is I think that we as developer kind of grew and became older and a little bit wiser. And I think the game also kind of, so we wanted to make a different game, and the team wanted to really do a different game, make a fresh start. So there's a lot of different things. It's just the tone of the game is very different. It's more reflective. There's still moments of rage with Kratos, of course, but there's a lot of story. And the big changes obviously is addition to the he now has a son, Atreus, who the story starts with them. His mother dies, and her wish was to take her ashes and spread on the highest mountain of all the realms. So that's how the game starts, and then so the story is it's a little bit more intimate and kind of relationship between Kratos and Atreus, and how it develops really was dictating the tone of the game. There's some technical changes. The camera changed a lot. It's much closer so there's a screenshot on the left-hand side of, I think, God of War 3, and a new. So for sound, it meant a lot of things, and the main thing is that you're more sort of in the environment. You're surrounded by those sounds. You can feel things around you, especially if you play in the surround. So if you imagine an enemy attacking you from behind in the previous games, you could actually see them. You could come to Kratos even though he was facing one direction. You would see the enemy coming. In this game, you wouldn't see the enemy. So the sound had to play a more role also in the gameplay, in telling the player, oh, there's something, you might want to turn around because there's something coming. The mythology changed. Now this is a Norse mythology versus Greek mythology, and the big thing was the no cuts. There's no camera cuts, which created other challenges, mostly technical, but for us as well, just kind of how we managed loading, unloading, how we managed sounds, and how cinematics had to be really seamless. And the overall sound direction that we received was it had to be much more grounded in reality. The world is it's a raw, unforgiving environment. There's a lot of forests and those kind of things. There's still magical element and Kratos with his rage, but it's a lot more grounded in reality from previous God of War games. So I wanted to mention environments a little bit because we spent a lot of time making sure that they're interesting. It's not an open world game, but you can still sort of wander around and do some side quests. And so we wanted to make sure that if you're just exploring the world, it's very interesting. So we relied a lot on, not as much, there are some ambient sounds, sort of like quad sounds or surround sounds playing, but we relied a lot on emitters, on things that are placed in the world, to make it seem like you're actually there when you're turning around. It's it just kind of it helps you to orient yourself in the world. And we kind of used, we looked at the level, and any element that could make a sound, we would make a sound for it. But that seemed, it wasn't enough really. So we ended up doing a lot of emitters that had nothing to do with what's in the world. They would be just placed sort of arbitrarily in the world, and just to create a sense of space. They would match the type of the environment, but it doesn't have to be. It wasn't just one-to-one in terms of a sound source and a sound emitter. There was a lot more sound emitters than sounds that visual sound sources. And then we had to balance the sort of the natural and real quote unquote sounds with magic, especially with environments. It was quite challenging, not to make it feel like it's just, magic forest. It still had to be sort of raw and unforgiving. And we also had this idea of introducing areas with subtle whooshes and sounds. So when you first walk into a cave or a chapel or any area, you would sort of hear this, sort of very soft, but some sort of signature sound that will be introducing the area. And it only happens when you first enter it. We kind of liked it so much that in a lot of places we ended up using it kind of randomly throughout the level. And I don't think we took it to the extent that we originally wanted to. I think we had more time. We probably would have spent a little bit more time on that. So when I want to play, I put together a couple of environmental sounds. I just recorded basically them standing in the world and just kind of looking around to show you the sort of the depth and depth of those environments and what kind of sounds we did there. What you're going to hear today is not how you would hear it in the game, because I brought up everything just so we can clear. In the game, they're much more. They sit in a mix much lower, so you're not really focusing on that. They're kind of helping you be involved in the world, but just for the purposes of the presentation, I brought them up. So here they are.
Is there something glowing inside that knot? Listen, I hear a voice.
Another elf?
I don't think so. It's coming from up there.
So there it is. So those are those examples. Another element I wanted to talk about were the creatures and sort of how we approach that. So there's this dragon in the game that you fight is one of the bosses, and it's just huge. So I worked on most of the sounds, including vocalizations and the moving sounds, and so it has a lot of layers. We built the sound of the dragon from a lot of layers. It has the main thing was just basically to convey its size and how dangerous it is. He has some electric elements in his attacks. And we build it with normal sort of elements like foley, footsteps, sounds coming from the mouth, electricity for the attacks, and special attacks, and with a lot of what was interesting about the footsteps and just any bigger sounds is that no matter how loud we made them, if there was a footsteps put on his foot, no matter how loud we made them, it still didn't feel large enough. It didn't really. We couldn't make it any louder, so we basically ended up doing is have that sound localized where his foot falls on the ground, but also has a layer, has a quad. There's a quad sound that triggers at the same time. That has a little bit of the attack, but mostly just early reflections as well as some slapback delays, kind of depending on the area. So that really helped to convey the size because it just sounds enormous. So that's a little trick. So what I wanted to show you, which I thought was interesting, is how I built the vocal, kind of the basic roar for the dragon. I did record my voice, did some processing kind of as a base. That's pretty standard procedure. And then layered a lot of different elements. I layered animals, layered different metallic sounds, screeches and squeaks and things like that to composite the roar. So what I did, I took those elements and sort of put them in a sequence. It's just an audio file. So what you're going to hear is the roar, full roar, then there's going to be my vocal that I use, and then there are going to be all the elements that came to build that one roar that you're going to also hear at the end. So that's it. So as you heard, there was a lot of really weird elements. Oops, a lot of a lot of weird elements, symbols, metal plates, that by themselves don't really sound that great. But just put together, especially because his animations had very long. This is actually like a medium length roar. So just to build that length and without having it be just like a noise that just plays and stops, we had to build a lot of movement into those sounds. So that's why it took that many layers of sounds to kind of make it more organic and sort of changing and over time. So just following up with the dragon, I want to play a very short sequence. It's the dragon reveal, kind of those sounds within a context of the game. So it's going to be just the dragon sounds, just his vocals, and then you hear the same scene with everything else put together. It's kind of to see, to how it was all built up.
That was intense.
Yes, that was intense. So what you can hear is we also wanted to make sure that those sounds actually fit in the world. So this is a cave, so there's a lot of reverb that'll be sounding very different than it was outside. So just to kind of how we manipulated the sounds within the environment. That's just another example. There's Magni and Modi that you fight in the game. And they also have electric element. And what was interesting about them, I also worked on those guys. And then what was interesting is that they have their own attacks. But at some point they also have combos where they come together. So just to making sure that those sounds worked on their own, as well as with the other counterpart of the attack, was a little bit of a challenge. And they fight in this small arena with I guess, but it's open. It's not a cave. It's sort of like an arena just surrounded by tall mountains. But at a certain point, they go into this mode where there's the visibility pretty much goes down to almost zero, and they kind of fight in the fog. And what we were trying to do with that is to give it a sense of sort of being lost, not really knowing where you are, and kind of not knowing where your opponent is going to come from. So we did some treatment of the sounds, of the environments. There's obviously reverb, and it just sounds very different from just like a regular battle. So okay, let's hear this very quickly.
Looks like they need another lesson. More than happy to teach, brother. Weak and pathetic. Unbelievable. You mean to oppose the might of Asgard? You've got some father, kid. And I always feel bad for you. Oh, there, brawl there, bleed there. Your mother ugly or something? She cut up your face so you look like her.
Don't talk about my mother!
Don't talk about my mommy.
Don't listen to him, lad. Trying to rile you up.
Okay. So what I guess should have mentioned even before playing those clips that you probably noticed the frame rate is a little bit shaky. It's because the way I captured it with a lot of things connected to the dev kit, so it's not how the game runs. Just a disclaimer. So yeah, a lot of things went really well. So just wanted to kind of go through that, and mainly just to share it with you, just to to make sure that you understand that every project has its ups and downs, and we all fight the same battles a lot of time. So what really worked was the aesthetic vision. I think we were very clearly communicated what we were supposed to do, both from the high level, the director, the game director, as well as the lead, sound lead. So we were given a lot of creativity, and also with clear directions. And I think this really kind of made our work that much easier. Well, that's kind of an obvious one, but I have to mention that I'm really lucky to be working with the group of people that I'm working with, and it's been quite a challenge. But because of the people that I work with, they're just incredible, and it made it really possible. Without those people, I don't think we would have been able to accomplish what we did. I have to mention casting of Kratos, mostly Kratos and Atreus. I mean, the chemistry is just unbelievable. The kid is also he's a very good actor. If you ever see YouTube of videos where how they did mocap and not just motion capture, but performance capture for the scenes that are together, it's really interesting to see. And kind of, you can get a goosebumps just from watching them in those, funny suits with, light bulbs. But they're really amazing. And yes, we kind of persisted through the thick and thin, and this kind of despite a lot of problems that we've had, I think the team was experienced enough to know that things will come together, and we just have to go through it and just kind of keep going. And it's that was a very important lesson also for us. And the mix I want to mention because the game is was very kind of thick in sound. Like you heard those examples with environments. There's a lot going on there, so it was very important to mix. So that it's not really overwhelming. So also that the game is dynamic. I think we accomplished that. It took a long time. The first pass to just play through the game and do like a RAF mix pass took us 4 weeks. And then we kept mixing for another probably month and a half or so, or maybe 2 months. And the mix came out really balanced. We're very happy with it. Balanced and dynamic. And also what was interesting to see during the mix process is there were places where we thought, well, this is not really done yet. It needs more work, needs revisions. We need to make this sound better or that sound better. It went into the mix. After the mix, we listened to it, and it's like, yeah, this is fine. We're done. And actually, the mix brought so much to the overall sound of the game that made things that otherwise probably wouldn't have worked really, really well. So what didn't go that well, and so for the game of this size and this complexity, we didn't have really good and efficient tools. Things that, like animation tagging, working with cinematics, and those kind of things were a little bit cumbersome to implement. That's why we ended up having a lot of implementers, and including build times, including just general tools to make us work a little bit faster. We could have had better tools for this complex and large game. And we did have some difficulties, namely with abstraction and occlusion. And this is basically how sound behaves when it encounters objects and how it goes around it or through the walls and those kind of things. So we kind of struggled with it a little bit, and ended up turning off a lot of things because it just didn't work, and we just couldn't get it right really, and ended up doing a lot of things sort of most like more zone-based than with abstraction and occlusion. It's still there, but I wish we had a little bit better luck with it. And that also had to do with the raycasting and how Engine couldn't really handle a lot of raycasting for us. And we also had some issues with streaming sounds, with starting streams at the same time for cinematics. And there were some issues there. Repeating tasks. So this basically is, you work on something, you come back a month later, and oops, it's not there, or it's not working the way you intended. And so we had a lot of that. Because of how the game was changed and how it was developing, things just kept breaking all the time. And we would go and redo the same thing over and over again. And that was not very efficient. I don't think it's anything, it's nobody's fault. It's just how the development worked. In the end, the team pulled it off together, and we were able to deliver. But it was a challenge. The same thing with the schedule. It was a little bit, it was moving. It was sometimes unclear maybe, and with just again this complexity of the game. Sometimes it was not easy to work with the schedules we were given. And believe it or not, we still, despite all those numbers I gave you at the beginning, where we had so many people working on it, we still felt stretched too thin at some points, especially with core sound designers that were on the team in the building. We got enough help, I think, from the outside, Technicolor or Formosa or those vendors, in terms of creating sounds, but they still had to go. We still had to implement them, tweak them, make sure that they work as intended, deliver comments and ask for revisions and those kind of things. So that felt like at times we were very overwhelmed. To conclude, it was a really tremendous effort to make that game, and to be honest with you, reading reviews and just listening how people react to it and how well it is received, it's such an enormous pleasure because we worked on it so hard, and it paid off in the end. So it's just amazing to see how well received the game is. I think it's a game that was done in, at the right time. I think the public is ready, the gamers are ready to play a game like that again. Wish we could have had better tools and a little bit streamlined process. In the end, there was a collaboration of so many people that resulted in this game that we couldn't have done it without the crew that we had. So I want to leave it up for questions. So that's all I prepared, but I'll be happy to answer any questions if there are any, please.
Yeah, we can.
Thank you.
If you have any questions, please come to this point.
Come on, guys.
We're gonna use microphone because it's better for our recording. So we have I think we can manage. Questions.
How much time do we have?
About 5 minutes.
Okay. If I can answer questions right now, I'll be happy to stay later or just catch me anytime, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Great speech. I love the examples. I have a question about sound reverb. Basically, we are a small studio, and we get our sounds from the internet, sound libraries, and I even think we make some of our sounds. I'm not sure. Basically, what I've noticed is that the reverb of sounds doesn't match. One sound sounds like it was recorded in a isolated vocal booth. Another one sounds like it was recorded in a larger room, so it has a lot of room reverb. And another one sounds like it was recorded outdoors. I noticed that this causes certain confusion.
Of course.
Is that just me, or is that an actual problem?
No, it's not just you. It's just because those sounds were recorded at different, at different locations and with different reverbs. So there isn't much. I mean, you can do some creative editing, and there are some tools that you can strip reverbs out of the recordings. Some work better than others, but in the end, it's just the quality of the source. So if you can, so that's what I'm saying. Like, if you have sounds that you really love, that you want to keep, I would just try to use some tools, and I can give you names later, that you can extract that reverb, make it with less reverby as a source, and then apply overall reverb from the game, basically. But there's really no substitute for a good source.
As I feared. Thank you.
Sure.
Hi. Hi. The game is really wonderful, and the sound design really took it to the next level. So really, I'm grateful for that, and probably many people would think the same way.
Thank you.
I'm wondering, which part or which creature was the hardest to design and implement in terms of sound design?
Well, probably different sound designers can tell you different things because we work on different things. I mean, for me, the dragon that I showed was the hardest one. That's kind of also why I brought it here to share. Those type of sounds are the most challenging for sound designers because you can pick up if there's anything fake or repetitive in the voice. The human ear can pick it up really easily, and just to the size of the dragon and the variety of moves. So this was the hardest one. I think other sound designers will probably agree with me that any creatures, the enemies that are in the game that have those weird voices, those were the hardest ones to make.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. And just one more thing.
Sure.
Could I ask you for autograph later?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
I'll be happy.
Hello. Thank you very much. Good talk, good presentation. My question would be, with all of the stuff that you recorded and all of the sound design that you did, were there any times when you had to use or used pre-made audio sample packs? If so, then why, and what's your opinion in general on using pre-made sample packs versus recording and designing sounds from scratch?
No, we did use quite a lot of library sounds. We always try to record as much as we can. For a number of reasons, it makes the sounds unique, it builds the library for us, and it's also a fun experience to do, to go out and record stuff, but sometimes it really depends on the budget and on the timeline we have. So we did some recordings of some animals, of some like elements. I try to record as much as I can. It also depends kind of on the source. But there's nothing wrong with using libraries. I don't have any, we have a pretty extensive library of sounds to choose from, and it's never one-to-one. You never grab a sound and just use it as such. You just build maybe some recordings, layer with some other sounds from the library, and then, you just have to have good libraries. And there's a lot of good libraries right now, especially the small ones, the boutique ones. There's guys going, and recording it. So yeah, I have no problem using libraries.
Thank you very much.
Hello, thanks for the talk. It was really great.
Thank you.
And since this game is third person, how did you manage audio listener? How did you manage spatialization and attenuation? Was that on the character or the camera?
Mm-hmm. No, we usually do. The listener is placed in between the character and the camera, and we have a control over percentage of how close to character we want to place it. So we experimented with different settings, and I don't remember exactly what the settings are, but it's somewhere in between the character and the camera, and that kind of helps. Make sure that the specialization is the way it's supposed to work. The things are playing from the right channel, but also there's not a lot of that snapping, left and right when you move the character around. What we also did is we would do curves, volume curves for azimuth, which is basically if something is kind of behind you, we would duck the sound a little bit more. Versus in front of you, just to kind of like a mental focus, really. It was very subtle. It wasn't a huge attenuation, but just a little bit.
Okay, I got one more question about reverbs and reverb zones. If you design sound, did you apply reverb in some DAW before implementing to the game, or did you use the in-engine reverb zones?
Yeah, we would never put a reverb on the asset. No, the assets should be as dry as possible, and then apply reverb in a game, because that gives you flexibility to make it sound the way you want it. Yeah, right. And we used in WWise we used convolution reverb for some elements, but it turned out to be pretty expensive in terms of CPU, so we had to scale it back a little bit. So it's a mix of different reverbs, kind of depending on the environment. But yeah, it was never built into the sound. Even
the dragon you showed?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, you could hear the elements. When I played the elements, I think some of them had just, because the sounds I used, maybe they had some like a little bit of room ambience, but no, the long reverbs, the reverb that it made it sound, in the cave, no, that was all in game.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
And last question. That's what I'm talking.
Hi, thank you for an amazing presentation. I really enjoyed it. I have only one question. It's like 20 sound designers. How do you manage to keep the sound consistent? That every sound kind of area and category kind of match at the end. That's very interesting.
That was hard. That was difficult. Like I said, even though we had that many resources, we were still running out of time because we had to review, give notes to make it consistent. Well, I mean, it basically came down to people owning certain areas or certain levels or areas of the game, so they can make it sort of consistent within that area. With all the vendors outside, we just work with. I mean, honestly, I'm so lucky because we work with the best. So what they deliver really good things. But what's interesting to say, because we did it deliberately, how we split levels between ourselves, like between the core sound designers. And we wanted them to sound differently, so we kind of knew that each of us has a little bit of different style, different approach. So that actually we used it to our advantage to make the environments and the levels sound different. Not just because we use different sounds, but it's because a different sound designer works on it.
All right.
I hope that answers the question.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your questions. I don't know if we can produce enough proper sound after this presentation, after hearing, for example, the Earth Dragon, but let's try and give thanks to Daniel.
Thank you.